3 tiny figures sat motionless beside the worn trail, looking like broken dolls someone had thrown away. The oldest girl, maybe 9 years old, held her arms around 2 smaller children, a boy who couldn't be more than 5 and a girl about 7. Their torn clothes fluttered in the hot wind, and their faces were burned red from the sun. Sarah Mae Winchester had counted 5 wagons, 3 horsemen, and 2 mail riders pass by those children in the past 2 hours. Every single person had looked straight ahead, pretending not to see the 3 little ones dying slowly in the desert heat. But Sarah Mae couldn't turn away. Something about those helpless kids made her heart ache in a way she hadn't felt in years. She guided her mare to a stop about 40 yards from where the children sat like stone statues. The oldest girl had stringy brown hair that stuck to her sweaty face. Her thin arms wrapped protectively around the younger ones, who leaned against her like they were already half dead. None of them moved when Sarah Mae's horse snorted and stamped its hooves. For 5 long years, Sarah Mae had learned to mind her own business while working the cattle trails around Dustwater Valley. She'd seen plenty of trouble and had always ridden past without getting involved. It was easier that way, and a lot safer for a woman alone. But watching the oldest girl's chest move up and down in quick, shallow breaths, Sarah Mae felt something crack inside her chest. She climbed down from her horse slowly, her boots hitting the hard dirt with soft sounds. The children still didn't react. Sarah Mae walked toward them like she was approaching scared horses, keeping her hands where they could see them and moving real careful. When she got close enough, she could see the fine dust covering their skin and how their clothes had once been nice, but were now just sun-bleached rags. "Hey there, little ones," she said softly. The oldest girl's eyes flickered toward her, but there was no hope in them, just the empty stare of someone who had given up completely. "When did you last have some water?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Sarah Mae reached for her water bottle and carefully tilted it to the girl's mouth. The child drank like she was dying of thirst, water spilling down her chin. Then she turned to help the other 2 drink with shaking hands. "What are your names?" Sarah Mae asked gently. "I'm Lucy," the girl whispered, her voice rough as sandpaper. "This is Ben. And that's Emma." "Where's your family, Lucy?" The girl's eyes went wide with fear. She shook her head hard and pulled the other children closer. "Can't tell, can't say. The man warned us what would happen if we talked to anyone." Sarah Mae felt her stomach drop. She looked down the dusty trail toward the buildings shimmering in the distance. Dustwater was only about 4 miles away, close enough that these children could have walked there easily if they'd wanted to. Close enough that someone from town should have found them by now. But here they were, dying in the sun, while everyone pretended they didn't exist. "Who warned you, Lucy? Who told you to keep quiet?" But the girl had gone silent again, staring at something behind Sarah Mae. Sarah Mae turned around and saw another rider coming toward them. A man wearing a black hat despite the burning heat. He sat on his horse like someone who was used to being obeyed without question. When he got close enough, Sarah Mae could see the silver badge on his vest. The sheriff pulled his horse to a stop and looked down at them with cold, unfriendly eyes. "You'd better move along, miss. Those children aren't your concern." Sarah Mae stood up slowly, her hand moving toward the gun on her hip without thinking. "They're dying of thirst on a public road. That makes them everyone's concern." "Not these 3, the sheriff said, his voice carrying a tone that meant the conversation was over. "These ones brought trouble on themselves. Best to let things work out naturally." But as Sarah Mae stared up at the man who was supposed to protect innocent people, she saw something in his eyes that made her blood turn to ice. This wasn't just not caring, this was done on purpose. And suddenly, she understood that everyone hadn't just ignored these children by accident. Someone had told them to. The sheriff's horse shifted nervously as silence stretched between them. Sarah Mae could feel Lucy's small hand grabbing onto her boot, the child's fear flowing up through that desperate touch. Ben hadn't moved at all, his breathing so weak that Sarah Mae had to watch his chest carefully to make sure he was still alive. "I said move along." The sheriff's voice dropped lower, carrying a clear threat. "This isn't your business." Sarah Mae had faced down cattle thieves, drunk miners, and claim jumpers. But something about this man's calm certainty scared her more than any shouted threat ever had. Still, she didn't step away from the children. What kind of sheriff lets kids die in the sun? The kind who knows when to stay out of other people's business, he said, leaning forward in his saddle. The leather creaked loudly. You'd be smart to learn that lesson too. But Sarah Mae was studying his face now, noticing how his eyes kept looking toward town and the nervous way he kept adjusting his grip on the reins. This wasn't a man who felt comfortable with his authority. This was someone following orders he didn't like, but didn't dare refuse. Who told you to keep people away from these children? The sheriff's face went stiff. For a moment, she thought he might actually give her an answer. Instead, he straightened up and gathered his reins. You have 1 hour to be gone from this road. Don't make me come back here. He turned his horse around and rode hard toward Dustwater, leaving clouds of dust to mark his retreat. Sarah Mae watched until he disappeared, then knelt back down beside Lucy and the other children. The girl was looking at her with something new in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but a kind of desperate thinking. He'll bring more men, Lucy whispered. They don't want us to tell what we know. Who doesn't want you to tell? The lady with the bright gold hair, Lucy said. She told us if we ever said what we saw, she'd make sure we disappeared forever. Lucy's voice got so quiet, Sarah Mae had to lean close to hear. But we already disappeared, didn't we? Nobody can see us anymore. Sarah Mae felt something twist painfully in her chest. These weren't just abandoned children. They had seen something that powerful people wanted to keep secret, and everyone in this area had been warned to let them die rather than risk them talking. She looked at Ben, seeing how his skin had turned grayish. The boy needed food, water, and shade right away, or he wouldn't last another day. But helping them meant making enemies of whoever had enough power to turn a whole community into helpers. Can you tell me what you saw, Lucy? The girl's grip on Sarah Mae's boot got tighter. In the big house, with all the fancy glass windows, she said. We were cleaning, and we heard someone screaming from the basement. When we looked through the crack in the door, Lucy shuddered. The lady saw us watching. That's when everything went wrong. A big house with fancy glass windows. In an area like this, that could only mean one thing. Whoever owned the biggest ranch around here, someone with enough money and influence to buy silence from sheriffs and townspeople. Someone who could make 3 children vanish while everyone pretended not to notice. Sarah Mae made up her mind. She scooped Ben into her arms, feeling how light he was, how his bones seemed to rattle under skin stretched too tight. Can you ride, Lucy? The girl nodded, though Sarah Mae could see it took all her strength just to stand up. Then we're getting out of here. But first, we're going to find out exactly what you saw in that basement. As she lifted Ben onto her horse and helped Lucy climb up behind him while Emma held on tight, Sarah Mae caught sight of dust clouds on the horizon. Multiple riders moving fast toward them. The sheriff had kept his word about bringing others. But what he didn't know was that Sarah Mae Winchester had her own reasons for hating people who hurt children. And she'd learned long ago that sometimes the only way to fight monsters was to become something they feared more than their own secrets. Sarah Mae's horse carried all 4 of them toward the rocky hills she'd spotted about a mile off the main trail. Behind them, the dust clouds grew bigger, and she could make out at least 5 riders pushing their horses hard. They weren't lawmen anymore. The way they rode spoke of something darker and more desperate. She guided her horse into a narrow gap between 2 red stone walls, where shadows offered blessed relief from the killing sun. Ben slumped against Lucy, still unconscious, while the girl kept looking back toward their pursuers with scared eyes. Emma clung to Sarah Mae's waist, too frightened to speak. They're coming fast, Lucy whispered. Let them come, Sarah Mae said. She climbed down and lifted Ben into the shade, while giving all 3 children more water. Tell me about this lady with gold hair. What's her name? Mrs. Blackwood. Lucy's voice shook. She owns the biggest ranch outside town. Our pa used to work there with the horses. When Pa got hurt and couldn't work, Mrs. Ranch in the Pa got hurt and couldn't work, Mrs. Branch. Blackwood said we could stay if we worked for our food. Sarah Mae had heard of the Blackwood Ranch. Victoria Blackwood had taken it over from her late husband 3 years back and had turned it into one of the most successful spreads in the territory. People spoke of her with respect, mixed with fear. She was known for getting what she wanted, no matter what it cost. What did you see in that basement, Lucy? The girl's face went white as paper. There was a man down there, chained to the wall. He was hurt real bad. Mrs. Blackwood was asking him questions, but he couldn't answer anymore. That's when she picked up the hot iron from the fire. Emma whimpered and covered her face with her hands. Ben stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw Sarah Mae, he tried to hide behind his sister, but he was too weak to move far. "It's okay," Lucy told him. "She's helping us." "The man in the basement." Sarah Mae pressed gently. "Did you know who he was?" "Mr. Johnson." Lucy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He used to bring supplies to the ranch. Mrs. Blackwood kept asking him about some papers, said he'd stolen something from her, but Mr. Johnson kept saying he didn't know nothing about no papers." The sound of horses echoed off the canyon walls. Their pursuers had found the entrance. Sarah Mae checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded. 5 against 1 weren't good odds, but she'd faced worse. "Stay down behind those rocks," she told the children. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." As the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, Sarah Mae positioned herself where she could see the canyon entrance. The first rider who appeared wasn't the sheriff. It was a woman with fancy golden hair done up in curls, riding side saddle on a beautiful black horse. Even in the desert heat, Victoria Blackwood looked like she'd just stepped out of a fancy parlor. Behind her rode 4 men with the hard faces of hired killers. They spread out as they entered the canyon, hands resting on their weapons. "Miss Winchester, isn't it?" Victoria's voice was smooth and pleasant, completely opposite to the danger radiating from her companions. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." But as Sarah Mae stared at the woman who'd ordered 3 children left to die, she realized this was about much more than witnessing a torture session. Victoria Blackwood's eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who'd killed before and would kill again to protect whatever secret those children had stumbled upon. Victoria Blackwood climbed down from her horse with practiced grace, her expensive riding dress somehow still perfect despite the desert dust. She moved closer, her 4 gunmen spreading out behind her with the easy confidence of men who'd done this before. "Those children are thieves and liars," Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being believed without question. "They stole food from my kitchen and ran away when I tried to discipline them. I'm simply trying to bring them home." Sarah Mae kept her rifle ready but not raised, watching the positioning of the hired guns. The one on the left had a nervous twitch in his shooting finger. The one on the right kept glancing toward the rocks where the children hid. The third, a man with a gray beard and cold eyes, never looked away from Sarah Mae. The fourth hung back, watching the canyon entrance. "Funny thing about thieves," Sarah Mae said, "usually they run toward town, not away from it. And they don't usually collapse from thirst a day's walk from help." Victoria's smile never changed, but something flickered in her eyes. Children make poor choices when they're frightened. They've gotten themselves lost, and now they're too ashamed to admit their mistake. "What about Johnson?" The effect was immediate. Victoria's calm mask cracked for just an instant, and the bearded gunman's hand moved toward his weapon. But Victoria recovered quickly, though her voice carried a new edge. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. The man you were torturing in your basement, the one you were asking about papers." Sarah Mae took a step forward, watching how the gunman reacted. "The one those children saw you kill." This time, Victoria didn't try to hide her reaction. Her face went hard as stone. When she spoke, all pretense of politeness was gone. "Those children are disturbed. They tell wild stories to get attention." "So you're saying they made up stories about seeing you burn a man alive to find out where he hid something you wanted?" The canyon fell silent, except for the sound of wind across stone. Victoria stared at Sarah Mae with undisguised hatred, her carefully built mask finally falling away completely. "You have no idea what you're interfering with?" Victoria said. "Johnson stole documents that could destroy everything I've built. Everything this territory depends on. Those papers in the wrong hands would ruin innocent people." "What papers? Land deeds? Water rights? Contracts?" Victoria's voice turned pleading, as if she could make Sarah Mae understand. Johnson was going to sell them to railroad agents who would use them to steal everything from the ranchers who've worked this land for decades. I was trying to save this community. But Sarah Mae had heard similar justifications before, usually from people who'd convinced themselves that their crimes were noble. The way Victoria's men positioned themselves, the casual way she'd ordered children left to die. This wasn't someone fighting for others. This was someone protecting her own interests at any cost. "Where's Johnson now?" Victoria's smile returned, cold and sharp. "Poor man took sick suddenly. We buried him yesterday. Natural causes, of course." Behind the rocks, Sarah Mae heard Ben whimper softly. These children had watched this woman torture a man to death, and now she stood here, spinning lies with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for her actions. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah Mae said. "You're going to turn around and ride back to your ranch. These children are coming with me." The bearded gunman laughed. "5 against 1, lady. You might want to think again." But as he spoke, Sarah Mae noticed something that made her blood run cold. Ben's whimpering had stopped. In fact, she couldn't hear any of the children breathing behind those rocks. And Victoria Blackwood was smiling like someone who'd already won a game that hadn't finished playing yet. Sarah Mae's heart pounded as she risked a glance toward the rocks. The silence from the children's hiding spot felt wrong, unnatural. Victoria's confident smile told her everything she needed to know. This had been planned from the start. "Looking for something?" Victoria asked sweetly. Movement caught Sarah Mae's eye. 2 more men emerged from behind the canyon's far wall, and between them they carried Lucy, Ben, and Emma. The children were unconscious, cloth sacks tied over their heads. The men must have climbed around while Victoria kept Sarah Mae distracted with conversation. "Smart girl, but not smart enough," Victoria said. "Did you really think I'd ride into a canyon without securing all the exits first?" The bearded gunman stepped closer, his weapon now drawn. "Should have minded your own business, lady." Sarah Mae's rifle was still in her hands, but with the children in the line of fire, she couldn't risk a shot. She watched helplessly as the 2 men tied Lucy, Ben, and Emma to their horses like sacks of grain. "Here's what's really going to happen," Victoria continued. "You're going to disappear just like Johnson did, and those children are going back where they belong, 6 feet underground where they can't tell stories about things they never should have seen. People will ask questions. I'm not some drifter nobody knows." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Miss Winchester, you've been working cattle trails alone for 5 years. No family, no friends, no connections. Who exactly do you think will miss you?" The words hit harder than any physical blow because they were true. Sarah Mae had chosen isolation after what happened to her own family, convincing herself it was safer to care about no one. But now that distance meant no one would come looking if she vanished. "The papers Johnson stole," Sarah Mae said, buying time while she calculated angles and distances. "What makes them so valuable?" "Water rights to the entire Eastern Valley, forged documents that show I own land that belongs to a dozen small ranchers." Victoria's voice carried a note of pride. "Johnson discovered my little creative bookkeeping and thought he could blackmail me. Poor fool didn't understand that I'd rather burn this whole territory down than give up what I've built. Those small ranchers have families," Sarah Mae said. "Children of their own. And they'll keep them as long as nobody asks too many questions about property lines." Victoria gestured to her men. "The beauty of my system is that everyone benefits. The ranchers get to keep working land they think is theirs. I get the profits from the real ownership. And nobody gets hurt except the people who find out the truth." Behind Victoria, One of the men holding the children shifted his grip on Ben, and the boy's head rolled to one side. Even unconscious, he looked like he was fading fast. Whatever they'd used to knock out the children, Ben's weakened body couldn't handle it much longer. Time was running out, and Victoria Blackwood was holding all the cards. But as Sarah Mae stared at the woman who'd built an empire on lies and murder, she realized there was one thing Victoria hadn't counted on. Sometimes the only way to save innocent lives was to prove you were willing to lose your own. Sarah Mae dropped her rifle and raised her hands. The bearded gunman grinned, thinking he'd won, but Sarah Mae was counting on his overconfidence. She'd hidden a knife in her boot, and more importantly, she'd noticed something Victoria's men had missed: the way the wind was shifting in the canyon. "Smart choice," Victoria said. "Tom, secure her weapons." As the bearded man approached, Sarah Mae glanced toward the canyon walls, where shadows had started moving differently. The afternoon sun was hitting the rocks at just the right angle to create a blinding glare at the canyon's entrance. In about 30 seconds, anyone looking that direction would be temporarily blinded. "You know what the irony is?" Victoria continued, clearly enjoying her moment of triumph. "Johnson actually did me a favor by stealing those documents. I was getting careless, keeping them all in one place. Now I'll scatter copies across 3 different banks, making sure no one person can ever threaten me again." 20 seconds. Sarah Mae let the bearded gunman get within arm's reach, watching his eyes rather than his hands. "The children saw too much," Victoria said. "But you just made the mistake of caring about the wrong people at the wrong time." 10 seconds. The man reached for Sarah Mae's sidearm, and she let him take it, appearing defeated. Behind him, she could see one of the men holding Ben starting to squint against the increasing glare. "Any last words?" the bearded gunman asked. "Yeah," Sarah Mae said. "Duck." The sun hit the canyon entrance like a hammer of light. Everyone except Sarah Mae, who'd been careful not to look that direction, was instantly blinded. She drove her knee into the bearded man's stomach, snatched her pistol back, and put 2 bullets in him before he could react. The other gunmen were shouting, trying to clear their vision while controlling spooked horses. Victoria screamed orders, but chaos had taken over. Sarah Mae rolled behind a boulder as return fire sparked off stone around her. The problem was the men holding the children. Even blinded, they could still hurt Lucy, Ben, and Emma out of spite or panic. Sarah Mae needed to end this fast, but she couldn't see clear shots through the confusion of rearing horses and scrambling men. That's when she heard Lucy's voice, weak but defiant. "Ben, Emma, wake up!" Somehow the girl had worked free of the cloth sack. As one of the men tried to grab her, Lucy bit his hand hard enough that he screamed and let go. She tumbled from the horse but managed to land near her brother and sister, shaking them desperately. "Shoot the girl!" Victoria shouted, her cultured voice turned savage. But Sarah Mae was already moving. She came around the boulder firing, dropping one of the remaining gunmen before he could draw a bead on Lucy. The last man, still half blind and completely panicked, fired wildly in her direction. His bullet caught Sarah Mae in the shoulder, spinning her around. Pain flared through her arm, but she kept her grip on her weapon. The gunman was reloading, his hands shaking as he tried to see through the spots dancing in his vision. Victoria had climbed down from her horse and was pulling a small pistol from her riding dress. She wasn't aiming at Sarah Mae, she was aiming at Ben, who was just starting to stir on the ground beside his sisters. "If I can't have them silent," Victoria snarled, "I'll have them dead." Sarah Mae had 1 shot left. One chance to save a boy who reminded her too much of the little brother she'd failed to protect years ago. Her shoulder was on fire, her vision blurring from blood loss, but her hand was steady as she raised her gun. Time slowed as Sarah Mae's finger tightened on the trigger. Victoria's pistol was already pointed at Ben's head, her face twisted with murderous intent. But at the crucial moment, Lucy threw herself across her brother's body, shielding him with her own small frame. Victoria hesitated for a heartbeat, unwilling to kill the girl first when she could eliminate both children with a single shot through Ben. That heartbeat was all Sarah Mae needed. Her bullet took Victoria center mass, the impact slamming the woman backward against her black horse. Victoria's pistol discharged into the air as she fell, the echo bouncing off canyon walls like thunder. The last surviving gunman, his vision finally clearing, saw his employer crumpled in the dust and made the smart choice. He dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Sarah Mae kept her gun trained on him as she moved toward the children. "Lucy, Ben, Emma, are you hurt?" Lucy was crying now, great gulping sobs of relief and terror. Ben sat up slowly, still groggy from whatever they'd used to drug him. Emma crawled over to her siblings, all three clinging to each other. They were bruised and frightened, but alive. Victoria Blackwood wasn't dead, but she was dying. Blood frothed at her lips as she tried to speak, her elegant riding dress turning dark with spreading stains. Sarah Mae knelt beside her, keeping pressure on the wound, despite everything the woman had done. "The papers," Victoria whispered. "Johnson hid them in the old mine shaft, 2 miles north of town." "Why tell me?" "Because," Victoria's voice was fading, "because those ranchers and their families deserve to know what they really own." She coughed, specks of blood dotting her chin. "I thought I was protecting them, but I was just protecting myself." Her eyes lost focus, and Victoria Blackwood died in the dust of a canyon she'd chosen for murder. The surviving gunman was eager to talk once he realized his employer could no longer pay him. He confessed to helping dispose of Johnson's body and confirmed the location of the hidden documents. More importantly, he admitted that Sheriff Collins had been taking money to look the other way, while Victoria eliminated anyone who threatened her land-grabbing scheme. As the sun began to set, Sarah Mae fashioned a travois from her saddle blanket and some dead wood to carry the children back toward town. Her shoulder throbbed with every movement, but Ben was too weak to ride, and the girls refused to leave their brother's side. "What happens now?" Lucy asked as they started the slow journey back. "Now we make sure everyone knows the truth about those land deeds, and we make sure you three have somewhere safe to live. Will you stay with us?" Sarah Mae looked down at the girl who'd been brave enough to shield her brother with her own body. For 5 years, she'd told herself that caring about people only led to heartbreak. But maybe sometimes caring about people was the only thing that made life worth living. "For a while," she said. "At least until you're all strong enough to take care of yourselves." But as they walked through the gathering darkness, Sarah Mae couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them from the shadows between the rocks. The feeling proved right when they reached the main road. Sheriff Collins waited there with 2 deputies, all 3 men armed and positioned to block their path. But something was different about the sheriff now. His confident authority had crumbled into desperate fear. "Miss Winchester," he called out, "I hear there was some trouble up in the canyon." "Nothing that can't be solved with the truth," Sarah Mae replied, keeping the children behind her. "See, that's the problem. Victoria Blackwood was a pillar of this community. People depend on her ranch for work, for trade. If wild stories start spreading about her..." He let the threat hang in the air. Stories about forged land deeds, about murder, about corrupt sheriffs taking blood money. Collins's face went white. "You can't prove any of that. Johnson's body is buried on the Blackwood Ranch. The gunman who survived is willing to testify about everything he saw. And those documents Johnson hid, they're waiting in an old mine shaft for anyone honest enough to look." For a moment, Sarah Mae thought the sheriff might try to shoot his way out of this. His hand hovered near his weapon, and she could see him calculating odds. But then Ben stepped out from behind her, his young voice carrying clearly in the desert air. "My pa always said the truth was like water. You can try to dam it up, but it always finds a way through." The simple words from a child who'd nearly died for witnessing the truth seemed to break something in Sheriff Collins. His shoulders sagged, and when he looked at Sarah Mae again, she saw a man who'd lost everything. "What do you want from me?" "Resignation letter on the mayor's desk by morning. Full confession about your arrangement with Victoria. And help tracking down those documents so the real landowners can reclaim what's theirs." One of the deputies started to protest, but Collins cut him off with a wave. "It's over, boys. Has been since those children saw what they saw." The ride into Dustwater felt like a funeral march. Word had already spread about the gunfight in the canyon, and people lined the streets to watch as Sarah Mae brought in the children everyone had been told to ignore. Some faces showed shame, others relief that the truth was finally coming out. Dr. Morgan examined Lucy, Ben, and Emma at his clinic, declaring them undernourished and dehydrated, but fundamentally sound. The mayor, a nervous man named Foster, promised that the territorial authorities would investigate the land deed forgeries and ensure the rightful owners got their property back. But it was Mrs. Rebecca Stone, the town's seamstress, who provided the solution Sarah Mae hadn't dared hope for. She'd been widowed the previous winter and was living alone in a house too big for one person. After hearing what the children had endured, she offered to take them in permanently. "I always wanted a house full of children," she told Sarah Mae as they watched Lucy, Ben, and Emma share their first real meal in weeks. Maybe this is how it was meant to happen. 4 days later, Sarah Mae prepared to ride out of Dustwater. Her shoulder was healing well, and her business here was finished. The territorial marshal had arrived to investigate the corruption. Johnson's body had been found exactly where Victoria said it would be, and the forged documents were already being sorted out by legal experts. Lucy hugged her fiercely at Mrs. Stone's front door. "Will we see you again?" "Maybe," Sarah Mae said. "But you don't need me anymore. You've got Mrs. Stone, and Ben and Emma have you, and that's enough family for anyone." As she rode out of town, Sarah Mae thought about her little brother, David, who died because she hadn't been brave enough to act when he needed her most. She couldn't save David, but she'd saved Lucy, Ben, and Emma. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how healing worked, not by erasing the past, but by making sure it didn't repeat. Years later, Ben grew strong under Mrs. Stone's care and became the town's schoolteacher when he came of age. Lucy learned to read and write, eventually opening a small bookshop where she made sure no story was ever forgotten. Emma became a nurse, dedicated to helping people who couldn't help themselves. The families who reclaimed their stolen land prospered, and Dustwater became known as a place where justice mattered more than money. And sometimes, when children went missing or the powerful preyed on the weak, a lone rider would appear. A woman who'd learned that the only way to outrun your past was to make sure other people had a future worth living.